are going to talk about as our main topic on Mastering Dungeons this week, using the environment and terrain in encounters.
with dragons.
So with dragons. Uh, I actually did mention dragons here. So here we
Hey,
go. So one of the guiding principles in my design personally is that of one cool thing. Uh, put one cool thing in an encounter. Give one cool thing that a
yeah,
monster can do. And so with D&D and with many RPGs, they're cool on their own,
yeah,
right?
sure.
If you are fighting a dragon on an open field with nothing else to interact with, that's going to be a great experience.
Still
The
great.
first time and the second time and maybe even the 20th time. But after you've had many combats, the repetition allows players and game masters to get a little comfortable, to see
Hmm.
the predictable patterns in the interaction with the game machine that drives combat. So players will quickly learn their optimal tactics, and so will the game masters when they're
Yeah,
running certain monsters or monster combinations. And one of the remedies for that is to use the environment or use the terrain, especially of a combat, to make things a little less stable, a little less predictable, and a little more dynamic. What are your opening thoughts here, Teos?
when I was playing organized play and a really creative encounter would come along, I would go, oh, that's neat. I want to make this, right? I want to have encounters like this. And the more that I had those experiences of learning from really cool creators that did that awesome thing, then that's what I wanted in my games. And my problem has been the reverse. Like you have a very good diligence around saying one cool thing. I want to do like 40. And so my problem is
Mm.
always to try to bring myself down because I know you're right, but I want like I want to do so many things. And my problem is
Right.
always bringing it down to, under 5 is really, really good. So,
Yeah. So let's talk about this concept. So probably one of the most powerful ways to invite players and GMs to break this pattern is to introduce new elements into an otherwise unoriginal encounter or scene.
yeah.
And like Teo said, trying to do lots of cool things is great.
Mm.
The more uh, fiddly bits that you add, the more chance you have of either overwhelming or becoming sort of irrelevant because it's such a massive chaos that there are no
It's noise.
tactics.
Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes noise. So sometimes you want to start with just the slightest tweaks
Hmm.
and see how things change because of that. You could always take it a step further next time, or you can always add a second element, a complementary
Right.
element. But we want to see how we can bring the focus of the game from this repetition of the same attacks and the same tactics over and over again, put them in a new light.
Right.
Before we do that, though, let's think about things to watch out for
Yep.
when
Yep.
you do this. The first thing I want to talk about is time. When you make changes to an encounter, especially a combat encounter, time may be affected more than you would imagine. So even if length of play isn't a factor for you, you have 4 hours to play, and it doesn't matter if this encounter runs for 10 minutes or 2 hours, that's what you're going to do. That's fine. It's not the same for many of us. But even if time isn't a problem, attention could be. The player's ability or willingness to sit through longer turns, times when they're not doing anything, may be affected.
Yeah.
Um, I'm going to stop before I give an
Well,
example if you
yeah.
have anything to add.
A good way to think about this is if you've ever been at a convention game where there is an adventure written by somebody and a different person is the DM who did not write it, and they pull out a very pretty battle map that is not the map that was in the adventure. often the time is different than the DM expected because
Mhm.
your areas have changed. The features have changed away from what the creator intended. And a lot of times one of the key things that we're thinking of when we're designing is, well, it can't take up too much time. And fourth
Mhm.
edition is where I really learned this because there was so much tactic involved, right? Pushing X squares, pulling, all of that tended to have certain ranges it worked with. And so if you messed with the space beyond a certain point, things could really fall apart. And you can think of it in one way to think of it, it is in 30-foot increments, which is usually what someone moves in a round. If you exceed that, you now have to spend a whole round moving
Mhm.
before you can do damage. And so if you think of an encounter might run X rounds, choose your number you believe, 4, 5, 3, whatever it is. Well, you just added around to that because no damage is going to happen except from the ranged people, but that's going to at least be another round, right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I similarly, I once, more than once now, I've created encounters where the characters are in a situation where if they don't move between the start of the round and the end of the round, there's a consequence.
Hmm.
They're standing on a magical floor that soaks up life energy. So
Hmm.
if you stand still for too long, you need to move.
Yeah.
And it's great for making the combat more dynamic, right? People need
Yeah.
to move, they need to use tactics. Uh, but making someone move on every turn means decisions.
Yeah.
So not only are they thinking, what action am I going to take? And of all the lists of things I can do, what bonus action am I going to take, or do I want to take one? Now you're also asking them to decide, where do I move and how do I get there?
Yeah.
And
And
if
and
you've
you've
been at a
chosen a fairly simple thing of just saying
yeah,
stand still, take a penalty. But what if it's
yeah.
where you go matters, right? Then that's even more time consuming.
Exactly. And if you've ever been at a game where there are people that count every square as they, move and try to decide the easiest, quickest, least deadly path to get there,
Yep.
and you see
Yep.
them go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait. 1, 2. I've seen people spend
Yeah. Sure.
minutes doing that over and over again. And those are minutes of my life that I will never ever see. So just this tiny bit of
Yeah.
environmental effect
Yeah.
can double the length of a turn.
Yeah.
Uh, and if everyone's turn doubles in length, you have a twice as long encounter.
Another big one that I have is if there is something you must do inside the room. Like you've
Mhm.
got to, I don't know, stop a trap or open up a safe and take a thing or something like that. And that's supposed to happen during combat. But
Mhm.
the characters can't get to it because you've put so much interesting whatever stuff between them and it that they can't easily get there.
Mhm.
That can really become a slog, especially if you're
Yeah.
not supposed to fight the things to the death, right? There's a giant construct and you're supposed to fight it, and everybody ends up fighting right by the door. And now nobody can get to the thing that's actually the point.
Mhm.
You have to be really aware of those problems because that time will balloon in addition to frustration.
Yeah. So every variant that you add, every variable that you put in often leads to more decisions. Decisions lead to more time taken. Uh, so I'll always be aware. Uh, the second thing I want to talk about, another thing to watch out for, is overly punitive environments.
Mm.
So adding these unique environments should make play more interesting, not just harder. It's okay to make it harder for the players. It's okay to make it harder for the monsters, as long as it's not something that is impossible to overcome. And punitive doesn't just mean like taking damage or making the encounter harder. Punitive is stepping on the things that the players like to do. And so if one player loves to fly, they have a magic item that lets them fly or an ability that lets them fly for, say, a limited amount of time. Putting in things that uh, deny that flight once, okay. But the more you do it, the more you are taking away the fun of the player who wants to do the thing.
Right. Yeah, or an anti-magic zone, right? Like you can do that
Right.
once and that becomes a really interesting thing about how everybody contends without using magic items. But if you do that, for a whole dungeon, you're gonna they're
Yeah.
gonna start playing board games instead of your game. Um, yeah, and the punitive thing, it's like it's really we've got a fire breathing red dragon, and you can say, well, if I put it in a cabin with lava, that is awesome. And it is, but it can't be so difficult that there's just,
Right.
the lava is bursting and showering everybody with sparks and just constant damage. I'm reminded of what I think is the hardest encounter in all of 4th edition, if not D&D history, was the first the first game of the encounters season for Dark Sun had a
Mm-hmm.
rain of fire coming down that dealt something like 10 points of damage or 5 points of damage around. Then there was a monster that could give someone vulnerability, either
Mm-hmm.
10 or something like that. And then on top of it said everybody targets the caster. And these were a
Yep.
non-player, these were pre-gens. So this guy Castry got targeted, got vulnerability, was going to take just ungodly amounts of damage. And it was essentially, if you ran it as written, which many DMs sadly did,
Yep.
this player's character was just taken out. And welcome
You're
to this
doomed.
season of
Yeah.
encounters. And it was terrible to watch, like, and to read online, on the forums, people discussing, like, this went really poorly, but I ran it as written, and everybody's like, yeah, you shouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I use the term punitive because there's no objective gauge for what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of figuring it out, use your empathy, right?
Yeah.
If I were the player of this character, or if I were the players of this game, and this was happening to me, what would I feel? And again,
Mm-hmm.
generally, it's challenge is fun for a lot of people,
Yeah.
but crossing that line. So you use the example of the fire breathing dragon. If you enter its lair and you tell the players this entire area reeks of a noxious flammable gas,
Mm-hmm.
right? It reeks of methane, it reeks of something. You know that if the flame goes off, this is going to go up.
Yeah.
That gives them the opportunity to use gust of wind or
Mm-hmm.
to find another way to vent that gas so it won't be as devastating. Right? That's not being punitive. That's adding a tactical level
Right.
that the players can interact with as opposed to have it just happening to
Right.
them. So
Yeah. And I
another
think,
pitfall is
mm,
allow for interaction with that environment.
yeah. And I think that if you know that your red dragon fight is going to be too easy,
Mhm.
then having some lava pools that don't affect the dragon at all but affect you is making things even. You're not being punitive, you're being fair, you're making it a
Right.
fun challenge and so on. Um, Another angle around punitive to be careful about is when you want a certain course of action. Like the players should climb up this ledge to get the thing that'll turn the battle around.
Mhm.
But you make that punishing. That will make it so they don't want to do those kinds of things. Right. So
Right.
if you want someone to swing from the chandelier or swing across a chasm and turn off a trap, but you make that a pain, they
Mhm.
will learn to not do such things when you actually want the opposite. So if you're going to make that hazardous, you want to make that sort of in a challenging way of like, it looks hazardous, but you really think if you could do it, then great things would happen. And you have to deliver on that promise because
Right.
otherwise they're going to swing and go, oh, that was dumb. This was just the DM beating up on me. I should never have done this.
Right. No win situations are generally not good. It's
Yeah.
a situation where, as Teos said, win if you do this, great. If you fail, okay, there's a consequence, but not you are going to be messed up no matter what you do. Uh, so picking the lesser of two evils is usually less than fun.
Yeah, and I was like, just in general, and this is a problem I have, right? When I often come up with various interesting things, is that if it's confusing and not in a fun way, but it's just confusing, then
Mhm.
players feel bad because they don't get to exert their heroicness, their coolness, because they're
Yeah.
unsure of whether everything they do seems like it might be a bad idea. And that's
Mhm.
fine if it's like a brutal challenge. Like I recall there was a competitive event where there was a nozzle that was spewing some sort of acid. And so the natural thing you would do is break the nozzle. But when you broke it, it would spray out under pressure in like a wider area. That's fine because this is an event that's meant to be bad for you. Like it's
Right.
meant to
Right.
be unfair. You don't want to do that in an actual adventure because it says interacting with things is bad and you want your characters
Mhm.
to actually interact with things.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some specific examples of environmental tweaks or terrain changes that are commonly used to make an encounter more interesting. We'll discuss each, and some of them have their own specific drawbacks that we'll talk about. The first is adding cover
Mm-hmm.
within an encounter, places where characters or monsters or NPCs can hide behind. Any thoughts on this one, Teos?
Cover's great. It has the what the rules normally provide from cover, but also it helps the brain divide up the terrain. It kind of
Mhm.
breaks things into zones. It can cause the encounter to have a shape to it, a deployment to it. Sort of the way that at a party everybody gathers in the kitchen, right? There's a reason for that. And so similarly, by just putting different walls, hills, whatever, hedges, even if it's not cover in the traditional sense, that sort of walling and terraining, sculpting that terrain really changes where characters will go, in addition to offering the benefits of cover.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. A cover encourages movement
Mm-hmm.
as you move to get into a good position, and then the creatures chase you to get you out of that position and then continue that process. And it certainly encourages tactical play. Be aware, though, in terms of time, right? If everything is going to have a +2 to its armor class and dexterity saves, or a +5 to its armor
Mm-hmm.
class or dexterity saves, or if you need to move constantly in order to get a better position, it's going to mean fewer successful attacks and time spent on movement. So it is going to
Yeah.
cause a longer running encounter for you.
Yeah, like if you've got a bunch of goblins, right, and you can do something like say, well, I could have a whole bunch of goblins attack these characters, and that would be a fair fight. But I could also
Mhm.
reduce the number and put some of them behind cover. And now I'm
Mhm.
keeping time involved, but I'm making them more dangerous because I'm putting these archer goblins behind 3/4 cover for that +5 bonus to AC and dex saving throws. And at low levels, that's a very effective thing. I still need to think about how easily can somebody get up there to do battle with them. Once you get higher level, you'll have things like spells that they can use to cause trouble or defend. You
Yeah.
throw a fog cloud up there, something like that, and that's great because that becomes an interesting part of play. But you want to consider those things when you're working with cover.
Mhm. Difficult terrain is something that is used frequently in encounters. And so, for those of you not as familiar with the rules as some, every foot of movement in difficult terrain costs an extra foot. So, to move 5 feet, you have to spend 10 feet of movement.
Yeah,
What are some ways that difficult terrain is put in? Um, Moving through a creature that isn't tiny or your ally will be difficult terrain. Furniture that is sized for creatures of your size or larger is difficult terrain. So you can move through that
mm.
table.
Yeah,
Uh, it's just difficult terrain. Heavy snow, ice, rubble, or undergrowth. Liquid that's between shin and waist deep is difficult terrain. A narrow opening sized for a creature one size smaller than you is difficult terrain, or a slope of 20 degrees or more. All of that, according to the player's handbook, is difficult terrain.
that's cool.
Uh,
That's a lot of many options there to choose from.
yep. And so, what are some of the benefits, drawbacks of using difficult terrain? You want
Yeah, I mean, difficult terrain can almost achieve what cover does, right? You can layer the battlefield and the map so that some areas are easier to move through than others, and that encourages them to go a certain path. So if you think of almost like roles in combat, you can think of, okay, well, that big Etten, you can go to the Etten really easily, but to get to the archer goblins that are reinforcing it, that's going to require going through the difficult terrain, and it'll be harder to get there. It'll take a little longer unless you want to fight a range with them and have melee go at and ranged go to the goblins. But it's what can keep the goblins in a little longer into the fight a little longer, so that it doesn't quickly become just an end fight. Um, and then the fun, also seeing what the players will do because they might totally overcome it in some way, and that's great too. Um, Difficult terrain can also be neat as a surprise that tells a story about the area. So this like heavy snow, ice, rubble, undergrowth concept of difficult terrain. If the Etten, breaks the ice pillars into fragments that come down from the ceiling as well and creates difficult terrain, now that's also interesting as well. Or if the characters can do so, that becomes interesting.
yeah, giving that ability to make difficult terrain within an encounter adds a great amount of tactical diversity to the encounter. Knocking over the statue to make it break and smash, to break the ice, to strew rubble
Mm-hmm.
across the battlefield. Lots of fun can be had with it, but again, it will slow things down. And you may get a lot of discussion between players of no, put it here, no, don't put it there, no, don't do it,
Yeah.
says the character that wants to run up. Yes, please do it, says the wizard who wants as much, you know, problem between them and the monster.
Mhm.
It can get interesting.
Yeah, one thing when I have encounters that have these sort of elements, I plan on like I must take very quick turns, right? If there are these complexities and I know they might do that sort of discussion, then my turns must be lightning fast and I know exactly what my creatures do because if I start doing that, it's going to fall apart as DM, right? Like if I as DM I'm going to take too long, oh here or should I go there? You're just encouraging that kind of behavior. So you've got to take super fast, decisive moves to
Mhm.
compensate.
Yep. Now, here's where we get into the don't be punitive to the players specifically. If you have creatures that can fly
Mhm.
and the whole battlefield is now difficult terrain or worse, you are putting your characters at a disadvantage over the the monster, and it's okay for a bit. What's better is if everyone's affected by it,
Mhm.
or if the creatures have devised methods to deal with it that are either a risky but can still work.
Mm.
Okay, they can swing on this rope over the difficult terrain, but they need to make a athletics check to do it. And if they fail, they fall, take damage, and are prone into difficult terrain. That adds a dynamic level of fun to the encounter as well. Uh, there was one other point I was going to make, and it is just gone from my head
Mhm.
about this.
Mm.
So we will continue there.
Yep. Well, one thing that's I'll say about difficult terrain and one of the options here of a slope, something that can be fun is, and we'll talk a little more about this sort of angle, but the idea that it's difficult terrain in a certain direction, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like the steps are difficult terrain going up but not down, or something like that. That can encourage certain kinds of movement. It's you want to kind of get experience with difficult terrain and your environment in general before you go there, but it can be really neat, right? If you can slide to the dragon and around, but you're going to land prone if you don't make an acrobatics check, that can still be really neat when you lay that out for the player and they go, okay, can I just do, yeah, here's what would happen. You want to make that, you want to try it? Yeah, I do. That can be really neat.
Yep, those choices are very
Mm-hmm.
important. I think that was the direction I was heading in with that.
Cool.
Another way is changes in elevation. And for me, this is very interesting because it seems like not that big of a deal, but in terms of gameplay, it turns into a huge deal because height is not modeled well in fifth edition rules.
Mm-hmm.
So smaller medium creatures are assumed to control a 5 foot long by 5 foot wide square.
Yeah. Cube.
However,
Mm-hmm.
when you go in 3 dimensions and make it a cube, does a 6 foot tall human still only control a 5 foot by 5 foot by 5 foot square? In other words, if there's a creature 10 feet above them, can they still reach them with a longsword, with a dagger, not
Yeah.
thrown but wielded? Uh, because you could have a 7 foot tall medium creature, and this is where you get into problems with characters saying, well, I tried to jump up and swing. How long are my arms? Right. If you're asking in a game, how long are my arms? Chances are you've gotten a little bit too far into the weeds in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
tactical play.
Where all your players feel they have to say that their character backstory is retired NBA player. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Exactly. So when you start switching elevations, it can be fun. It can add some dynamics to it, but you're going to start dealing with these not even edge cases, these cube cases, uh, and climbing often
Mm-hmm.
then becomes a huge factor. And so you have to start looking at the rules for how fast can I climb? Do I need to make a check to climb? I found this rule in the player's handbook. A DM's at the DM's option, climbing a slippery surface or one with few handholds might require a successful DC 15 strength athletics check. And you should read that and say, well, okay, what about a surface with many handholds?
Right.
Does
Or
that
just
require no
not
check? Does
slippery.
that require a
Yeah.
lesser check? Does that not require a check at all?
Both versions of 5e seem to really not know, right? Like, I think we used to laugh about what is the DC to climb a rope?
Right.
I don't know, right? And sometimes it sounds like it's automatic. Sometimes it sounds like there's still a DC. And that's honestly, it's sort of fine. I just wish we had some guidance. And so, what you want to think through here, I think, is when you're going with elevation, what is what are you trying to achieve with it, right? And you need to consider your level of play and so on, because I love elevation. Like, I really, really, really love it. One is visually, if you play with miniatures, height is just gorgeous. It's
Mhm.
exciting. It just looks neat, right? I've run things like underwater adventures with like multi-layer, different stands that people are on at different levels of elevation, or flying combats, right, where you're flying around in the air and everybody can fly, or just simple even at low levels where it's just like a sewer but you can be up on the top area, and just modeling that in 3 dimensions is so exciting. Players absolutely love it. And then what you can't do is they're also excited to start this encounter, and you say, oh, yeah, okay, you've got to make a DC 15 strength athletics check to get to where everybody needs to get to. Someone's going to spend the whole combat trying to make that check.
Mhm. Yeah, very true. Uh, so, I mean, one way to alleviate that is to put ladders,
Mm-hmm.
put things in there that you can climb it, but if you
Yeah,
don't have a climb speed, you climb at half speed.
right.
So you can move 15 feet rather than 30 feet while you climb.
Yeah. Yeah, and a
That
lot of times
will, oh,
I was just say you could also think of, let's say you have something that's flying, but there's a ceiling, so they can't get completely out of the way. But a melee person could climb up to a certain level to then be able to attack it.
mhm,
Everybody else could attack if they have ranged weapons. And so you could think, well, probably my melee folks will probably be okay at getting up here through one of these means I've provided. Like, maybe they can swing up there with acrobatics, climb this surface with athletics. So a melee person can spend that time to then get that payoff of being able to land their melee blows that they're better at. The ranged people can still get really good shots against it. That can work if you're expecting that, right?
and this is where something like the new weapon mastery system gives a slight benefit,
Mhm.
which is if you can knock a creature prone who's flying,
It doesn't have
they
hover.
tend to fall.
Yeah.
Uh, and so you may have the barbarians who are usually doing everything with melee, taking weapons that maybe I don't even know if there is a ranged weapon that can topple.
I don't
Uh,
think so. Mm,
Probably not, but that would be something that you could a
yeah.
spell that would knock
Hmm.
prone, something that would
Yeah.
bring the creature down so the rest of the characters can go at it.
Yeah, or adding something in the encounter that might be used that way can be fun too, right? So there's this big
Precisely.
dragon, but if you can cause these stalactites to crash down on its wings, it will be injured enough that it won't be able to fly, right? Something like that, and yeah, they could see that, right? That the characters can pick up on this or have heard about this, then
Mhm.
that becomes an option.
All right, so I think we've covered difficult terrain, elevation, cover. Uh, we can go in various directions at this point, Teos. Is there another topic that you would like to bring into this?
Well, the idea of moving parts is something that I like a lot. It's a complex part. It's a complex thing to add to encounter, but it can be super fun. A simple way to think about it is a teleporter, right? So if you have something on the side that you could walk into this teleporter door and appear in another area, that makes the combat very dynamic. It also accelerates the combat. It's the opposite of that difficult terrain because now you could actually show up somewhere else, assuming you know where it goes to. You can
Mhm.
go zip across the battlefield, and so can the enemies. That can be really interesting.
Mhm. And this is where you can let the character's skills come into it.
Yeah.
There are four teleporters in the room. When you enter one, you come out in a random one. However, if you can succeed on an Arcana check
Mm-hmm.
before you enter, you can attune it to the place that you want to go. So the wizards or the
Mm,
sorcerers or whoever could be spending their free action, bonus action, whatever,
yeah.
attuning the teleporter. So when the barbarian runs through, they're
Right.
coming out where they want to be rather than one of these other random places.
Yeah, that's awesome, right? That's just reward. That's just fun sauce for the arcane character. Um, Another that I've done that can be fun is where the like we talked about slides, that can be great. Slide down to the dragon versus go down the steps. You might land prone, you might not. Um, Traversing a chasm by swinging across, right? Or even something like a rope bridge. I've done this where I've had a rope bridge and the sides were frayed. So you could choose to
Mm.
use it to swing across as well. So you could get part way across the bridge and then swing on one of these hanging rope
Mm.
strands to go to the other side. Um, and then really complicated, I did once for an adventure that I wrote for you in Living Forgotten Realms. There was you descended down, including through slides, to a frozen area,
Mm.
semi-frozen area of ground, and there were kind of ice flows floating on this liquid area. And every round, these pieces sort of moved around, creating a dynamic combat. That was a little tough to run,
Mm.
for
Yes.
sure.
Yeah.
But I forget exactly what the rules are. I did try to write the rules, so it was pretty easy for the DM. But it did mean the DM was rolling to see where each of these like 4 or 5 tiles moved around, and was using dungeon tile pieces. But you'd move them around in the water, which changed up how close foes and friends were to each other, which was kind of neat. Very
Uh,
dynamic.
Combat in a river, a like fast flowing river,
Yeah.
where or some sort of conveyor belt, where unless you use your move to stop yourself from going, you will move 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, 60 feet down river, down the conveyor belt. And then you might call for a athletics check to swim to either stay where you are or move against the current or move
Hmm.
perpendicular to the current. Otherwise, that's where you end up. And
Yeah, I
so
did
it
a.
adds a little bit of risk. It adds a little bit of chaos, but it's still manageable
Hmm.
in a quite a set way.
Yeah. I did a battle on a slope of sand
Mhm.
where I forget if it was at the start of your turn, maybe there was a chance that the sand shifted enough that you slid down from where you started. So that
Mhm.
could cause opportunity attacks. It also meant that that changed up your tactics. So, because all of a sudden you might be in a different place. And that happened to every creature. I just kind of sliding down this slope. And it was actually really fun the way it worked.
So moving parts is one.
Mm-hmm.
Lighting is an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one where it's hard to justify constantly going between um, darkness, dim light, bright light, and figuring out everyone who has a light source, everyone who has the one trick I love to do, which is super quick and tends to be very evocative, is to just assume everyone has a torch who needs one. And then, or let me rephrase that. Everything is well lit. You don't need a torch. You don't need uh, to have your light spells going. You're fine. And then all of a sudden, all the lights go out.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that becomes fun. It can usually resolve itself pretty quickly. But for just that moment, there's that sense of dread for those characters that don't have dark
Yeah.
vision
Yeah.
who are going, wait, I cannot see anything. And then I say, roll initiative. And everyone is dreading if they don't get initiative and don't have the time to light the torch or get the
Yeah.
spell off, that something is going to happen to them in just that first round.
Yeah, you can have a lot of fun with that because lighting from fourth edition on has become very safe. They're huge areas of light. They kind of are assumed to always work. Nothing's blowing out your torch the way you used to in old editions. You don't even worry about your torches running out because everybody has so many. And so when you mess with that, it's really neat. And what I've often done is something like what you're talking about, where for some reason, magical, whatever it is, all the lights go out, but then also when you light a light source, the radius is vastly reduced. And that can be a really fun encounter when you have suddenly this little globe of light. And if you do a maze like room, it
Mhm.
becomes really interesting and thrilling for the characters to understand that anything goes and you can't put the light on the entire party is neat, right?
Mhm.
It'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah. But other than that, sometimes getting bogged down in the lighting
Mm.
situation, playing online, the fog of war and the dynamic lighting was so cool for like the first encounter, the first
Mhm.
adventure. And the players were moving themselves around to see how the shadows worked. And it was super neat. And then it just got frustrating
Someone
because
said
if
it,
you were the one in the dark and you couldn't
yeah.
see what was going on, it seemed to just take away from the game rather than add any sort of tension to it.
Yeah, someone said on our Discord that it can be it's one dynamic lighting is the thing you love when the DM set it up for you, and you hate to be the person who has to set it up. And I think that can be very
Yeah.
true. It can be really neat. I think the thing that's important about lighting is when you want it to matter, you've got to do the work to really focus on it, right? So you need a way
Mhm.
to track who has the light, to track what they can see. And we've talked a lot about it as if these are miniatures, but the other important thing is with theater of the mind, choosing elements that you can track well in the way that you're running it. So if it's on the table, I have a miniature of a torch that I put on the character so that I can really track it when lighting matters. Um, but when I'm doing theater of the mind, then I kind of think through, well, you guys can get three people in your circle of light. Which three characters are you putting there? And now that informs me how to run things theater of the mind, right? And makes it interesting in that same way. But it's an important thing to do is that if you're running theater of the mind and you don't feel you can do this justice, well, choose a different element, right?
Yeah. Uh, beneficial and harmful terrain, uh, dangerous or harmful terrain versus beneficial terrain
Mm-hmm.
is an interesting concept, and it really goes back to the same thing with cover or with difficult terrain. You want to use it judiciously to create experiences rather than just overall being punishing or too uh, extravagant with the benefits that you give. So having a situation where there are lava pools that you could stand in but take damage.
Mhm.
There are islands that are safe, and everyone using that to their tactical advantage becomes interesting when you have a creature that can do an area of effect spell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it better to all bunch together on this safe island when we could get blasted with the fireball? Or is it better to take the two
Yeah.
points of damage at the start of every turn, but be safe from that area of effect spell by standing in the lava?
Yeah, I think with these are really cases where you want to ask yourself as DM, is this clear and will it be an interesting choice, right? Like in fact, a book I'm quite fond of, Forge of Foes. We
Yeah,
have a
heard of
chapter
that.
on using the environment, and one of the ideas that one of us came up with was that idea of the king of the hill, right? Where you want to climb up to the
Mm-hmm.
top, and so you think of a pyramid where being up in the top areas gives you a bonus. So you could
Yep.
play with that of kind of like how good a bonus do you want? You've got to fight for being that person up there, and maybe only a certain number can benefit from it. But and maybe being at the bottom is actually harmful. So then that
Mm-hmm.
becomes interesting, right? Because you've got to make these choices to get up to the top, fight through something to get up there. That can be an interesting thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you could have it be skills, or maybe you're actually fighting things. Maybe there are hordes of skeletons down below. You know, maybe the floor is lava and it's rising up. But that kind of concept can be a lot of fun to play with. You can do a lot of things with it, of those ideas of beneficial versus harmful. Um, Things like you can think of a lot of video games do things like this, right? Where, you know, if three people stand on these symbols that are the emblems on the floor, then, you know, various people or those people get benefits. That kind of stuff can actually be a
Right.
lot of fun because it gets you moving. It just,
Mm-hmm.
again, because of encounter sizes movement, you have to think like, what do I expect my players to do? Are they going to spend 2 rounds moving to those? That might be a bit boring. So
Mm-hmm.
probably should be pretty easy to get to them and a pretty good
Right.
payoff so that, you know, they feel good about doing these things, because you're always selling the next encounter too. So it's not just this
Mm-hmm.
encounter. If you make it so it's like not even worth doing, well, then next time you show a feature like this, they may not even want to do it. So you've got to give some pretty good payoff for them.
Sure.
One other aspect I thought about is how you can approach the room. So if you can come in through different areas, right? If you consider like a
Mm-hmm.
Y, you're in a passageway and it Ys, but you can see it's the same chamber ahead, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
can kind of peek around, look down each side and go, okay, it's going to the same chamber. Do we want to split up? Do we all want to go left or all go right? And that can be fun because it changes up the dynamics of the fight just by virtue of allowing that variability, and can spread things out more. And usually there's a benefit to going both ways, right? Because you can get to different things in the encounter. But you can do that for enemies too. So you could have that goblins come in during the course of the fight and they come in from one of three approaches, and that can change things up too. So that idea of how you get into the fight or how you can move around, there could be a Y in the middle of the combat, right? Like a hill or a valley. And those kinds of choices, approaches of how you move around can have nice payoff.
I think it was Chris Perkins who came up with the line that symmetry is antithetical to fun. So you
Yeah.
want your situation, you want your setup to not be symmetrical.
Mm.
You don't just want a square room
Mm-hmm.
or a room where it's mirror image one side to
Mhm.
the other. You
Mhm.
want strange passages going off in different directions and nooks and different things happening in each of them to try to entice or interest the players in what is important about these other things and other
Mm.
ways, as Teos said, of getting into or moving around in an encounter area.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There's something about looking at a map and seeing that it isn't symmetrical. When it's symmetrical, everything feels sort of like it all equal. But when it's
Mhm.
not, it draws. You start trying to figure it out more, right? Because
Right.
there's the ruined wall on one side that cuts it off, or the river coming through, or whatever it is that changes it up. That naturally draws your eye to it to want to do something with it. Um, I love encounters that have weird, quirky bits to them. And then when the monster does something with them, that's neat, right? Like I think of there was an encounter season where Chris Sims had written this black dragon encounter, and the dragon could move through underwater pools, emerge and attack you. And when it needed to retreat, it could go back underwater and you couldn't easily follow it. I think the water did some mild damage or something, it was acidic or something like that. But he could, the monster, the dragon could move around through these pools to keep things very dynamic and keep you on your toes and keep from being pinned down. And that was super fun for a dragon fight.
Yep. And that gives the players the option to cover a thing with a wall of ice or a wall of force or something that would block that up and take that advantage away, making the players feel cool because they've come up with a plan to deal with this contingency. So
I love it. Yeah, and if you know that one of your characters can breathe underwater or can do something like that, then you can give them a benefit for using it. And that's a super fun reward when someone goes, oh, you know what? I'm a water genasi. I'm going to jump in after the dragon. Great. Make me check to grab its tail.
Yep.
You grab the dragon's tail and you're riding with it, following it around. Now you're on top of it. I mean, that's just great, right? That's where the fun really kicks in.
Yep. All right. We're getting into the end of our time here. Anything else about this topic you want to speak to, Teos?
Just the only thing I would really say is that you only learn by trying these things. And when you're going to, the more you're going to mess with things, right? It's one thing to put a little difficult terrain, and I think that's good. Start with a few easy things and see how that changes up the dynamics. But you eventually, to learn with really exciting things, you kind of have to fail sometimes. And so there's two things you can do. One is at the end of it, make those notes of what to do better next time. But even during it, find a way to correct it, right? And maybe think through that ahead of time of like, okay, if these pools are too difficult for the dragon, point out that the stalactites above can actually be, if you were to hit one, it would fall down and close off that hole. And now the dragon can't get in there. Make something up, some way to address it and fix it. And the more that you've planned beforehand, then you've got that stopgap measure ahead of time.
For sure. All right. Well, thank you, Teos, for sharing your expertise on encounter design.
Thank you, Shawn.
And thank you to all of our listeners out there. Thank you for those of you who support our Patreon, whether you are a Master of Dungeon supporter, whether you are a Master of Realms supporters who gets a shout out in our show notes, or if you're a Master of the Multiverse, you know what you get. You get your name mangled in real time by me. Zach Types, Z. Walt Winfrey, Chris Webster, Javier Waziak, Jason Ward from Accidental Cyclops Games, Graham Ward, James Walton, Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM, Joe Tyler, Therese, Jeremy Talaman from the D&D and TV podcast, Talos the Stormlord, Josh and Lee Wanika of the Tabletop Journeys podcast, Spark from Dunnar Games, Tim Smith, Krishna Simosa, Andy Shockney, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Runner Rick, Ozymandias Rex, Pugness, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Robert Pasley, Ricardo Who Might Adventure, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Frog Prince at Tentacles Squelching Wetly, Philip and Lindsay, Phil Wirt from Page, the Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo, DT Norris of DT and Dragons, Tom Nelson of the Deck of Player Safety, Falcon Neal, Sean Molly, Mighty Zeus, John Mickey, Trey McLemore, Anna B. Meyer of Fantasy Cartography, Eric Mengi, the Mathemagician, Almada, Chad Lynch, Jim Klingler, Brian King, JR of the Twilight Perspective, The Mighty Jerd, Mark and Mary's Gaming Compound, Hyperlexic, Sean Hurst, Ben Heisler and Paige Laitman, William Harshman of Runeforged Tabletop Gaming, Scott Fitzgerald Gray at Insane Angel Studios, James Fisher, Andy Edmonds at Nerdronomicon.com, Will Doyle, Evan at Nimbleco, Evil John, Dead Inertia DM, Kevin Criswell, Robo Balland, Calvin Bridges of Alos, thank you for the question, Merrick Blackman, Steve Bissonette, Dave Bastiansen, Craig Bailey, Lou Anders of Lazy Wolf Studios, Keith Ammond of The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and Agile Monk of Fantasy Companion Workshops. Thank you for your support. You listening out there, could become a patron of the show and get access to our show notes and our Patreon Discord and all of that by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd. You can also help us out by giving us a review, either on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the show. Or if you're a YouTube follower, go there and subscribe and give us the thumbs and the stars and all the happiness. We would appreciate that. Teos, where can people find you?
Ooh, find me at alphastream.org. From there, you can get to all my different stuffs. Where do we find you, Shawn?
I am on social medias at Shawn Merwin, and you can follow the podcast on the social medias at Mastering DND. You can also go to youtube.com/at Mastering Dungeons. So we have just figured out how to use terrain and environment to its best effect in our encounters. What are we going to do now?
Well, I need to install a slide that takes me from my second floor of my house to the bottom because that would be really awesome. I want to go
Yeah.
wee.
Yeah. I'm just going to jump. I think it's faster. We are.